Okay, good morning, people. How are we doing here? Ying is here. Good morning, Ying. Good morning again, Thika, or good evening, Thika. Hello, Min. Hello, Lily. Who else is here? Mashid's here again. Hello, Mashid. Ella's here. Hello, Ella. Carmen's here. Hello, Carmen. Um, I'm here. Hello, Mike. Aliana's here. Good morning. Good morning, Aliana. Good morning, Cindy. Casey's here again. Hi, Casey. Jenna's here. Hello, Jenna, and hello again, Karen. Okay, let's jump in. Okay, so today we will review what we talked about with China on Tuesday, and then we'll talk a little bit about. Hey, Michael. We'll talk a little bit about Confucius. Okay, so that's today. I've got a little video for you to watch, but um, let's dive in. Okay, so on Tuesday, forget if it was Monday or Tuesday actually, but earlier this week, we started talking about China, right? And we said we were going to try to explore how the environment had influenced Chinese culture and Chinese history, talk a little bit about politics and power and authority and governance, interactions and exchanges, conflicts and conflict resolutions, values and beliefs, and cultural expressions, right? That's what we're going to try to do here. We said that in terms of environment, good morning, Adalbert. We said, and Chiffon, good morning. We said that China was a very large place, and so it had a lot of climate and ecological diversity. But for our purposes, a couple of the aspects of China that are important are the rivers, and there are two major ones, the Yellow and the Yangtze, right? And the Yellow is kind of in the northern part of China, and the climate around that river is sort of cooler and drier, and it was more suited to wheat and millet farming, right? And of course, similar to what we saw in Mesopotamia and Egypt and in India, we saw that as populations grew and climates became beneficial for the growing of crops, people started to settle by river valleys and practice intensive agriculture, and that led to more complicated societies and civilizations. And that's exactly what happens here in China, very similar to the way that it happened in the Indus River Valley and in Egypt and in Mesopotamia. Okay. Whoops. So this was just a very quick map of the Yellow River. You can see it kind of in the northern part. Hi, Jimmy. In the northern part of China, running from the sort of mountainous areas in the west all the way into the sea in the east. And then the second major river, of course, is the Yangtze. It's in the southern part of China where the weather is warmer and wetter. And the type of agriculture people practice down there is rice agriculture. And so in the north, they're growing wheat and millet and crops like that. In the south, they're growing rice. And again, we see the development of complex societies in association with the river and in association with intensive agriculture. Yeah, and so here you can see the Yangtze again, coming from the mountainous regions in the west and flowing through the southern part of China and flowing into the sea there in the east. So we said China had a very long history of civilization, going back at least 4,000 years. And so people started to farm in China around 10,000 years ago, but it takes till around 4,000 years before we see kind of a civilization appearing. Okay, and we said that these civilizations could be described by dynasties, and a dynasty was a line of kings that were sort of related to each other, so sort of a father-son, grandson type scenario. And these dynasties exist, they start around 4,000 years ago, and almost amazingly, they extend all the way almost to the present day. And so the last Chinese dynasty is overthrown in 11. And so we have a very long, generally continuous history of dynasties in China, going back, as we say, thousands of years. And again, this timeline goes back so far that it doesn't fit in a straight line. You kind of have to snake this timeline around to look at it properly. And so here at the top of this diagram, I know you probably can't read every piece of this diagram. Maybe I'll zoom in on it a little bit later. But you can see some of the dynasties we've already talked about. So we've talked about the Xia around 2000 BC. That one is replaced by the Shang, and that one is replaced by the ZHOU, and then later by the Qin. And so those first four dynasties we've already very briefly talked about, right? So here they are, the Xia dynasty lasting for about 300 years or so, the Shang dynasty for about 600 years, and the ZHOU for maybe around 700 or 800 years. We said that the Zhou dynasty was the first one to appear, the first kind of centralized government to appear in China. But we said that initially there was some confusion amongst historians and archaeologists about whether this was a real dynasty, because there are no written records from this particular dynasty. The only reason that we know about it is from the Shang dynasty, who comes after them. And so early on, some historians were arguing that the Xia dynasty isn't real, it's made up. The Shang dynasty just made up the Zhou dynasty in order to justify why they were in power, and that the Zhou dynasty wasn't a real thing. Later, in I think the 1960s or 1970s, archaeologists uncovered remains of cities that were that dated to the same time as the Zhou dynasty. And so the question was, is this the Zhou dynasty? Is it actually real? And so at this point, we're not really sure what the Zhou dynasty was like. We're not sure how accurate the Shang dynasty writers were about this earlier Zhou dynasty. So depending on who you want to believe, hello Sabrina, depending on who you want to believe, the Zhou dynasty is either the first dynasty of China, or it was a myth, and the Shang dynasty is actually the first one. So we see the Shang dynasty appear around 1600 BCE. Again, whether it's the second one or the first one depends on who you believe. And this is a period of about 600 years of stability. And so this is a period where we see some of the basics of Chinese culture and society being created. And so we see some technological advances like ironwork and industrialized bronze casting. I don't think I found any pictures of those, but there is a good picture of one of these Shang dynasty bronzes in your textbook that you probably saw. We see that the Shang dynasty people invent a calendar. Religious rituals are kind of standardized, and we see the first appearance of writing in China. So this is the very beginning of writing in Chinese society. And again, writing is important because it allows us to tell what people are thinking and feeling and what they believe. Again, we said that the early Shang dynasty rulers set themselves up as deserving of being in charge, deserving their rule because they'd received the mandate of heaven. The earlier dynasty, the Xia dynasty, the Shang dynasty kings said that earlier dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven because they were acting immorally and selfishly, and they weren't looking after the people. And so basically the gods had withdrawn their right to power and had given it to the Shang kings. And so again, this idea of the mandate of heaven will be used over and over again for new dynasties to justify why they're in charge now and why the old dynasty is not. Okay. We talked a little bit about these Chinese oracle bones, if you recall. So these oracle bones were ways in which Shang Dynasty elite or Shang Dynasty kings could ask the gods or ask the ancestors the answers to important questions. And so they would take cow bones and they would ask a question to the ancestors or to the gods, like, if we attack this neighboring group, will the gods help us, or will the rains come in time? And then they heated the bone until it cracked, and based on how the bone cracked, that's what told the Shang priests what the answer was. And often they would write down the question and the answer on the bone itself. And so here you can see one of these oracle bones that have been found in archaeological sites. There's lots and lots of them. And again, they tell us we can read them, and they tell us about what these Shang Dynasty elites and rulers and priests were thinking about, what they wanted and what they didn't want, and what kind of things they believed in, right? So again, as soon as we have writing, we have very important information about what this culture was like. And so again, from these bones, we are able to determine that there was this high god called D, but there's other nature gods and spirits as well. And of course, there is ancestor worship happening at the same time. We said that the Shang Dynasty was overthrown eventually by King Wu of the ZHOU. And the ZHOU dynasty would last for around 700 or 800 years. I asked you to read this section of the textbook, of course, you'll remember from last week. And we said that after the ZHOU dynasty overthrew the Shang, they did three things, right? They moved their capital further east. They tried to convince the people that they were now in charge because the ZHOU had the mandate of heaven, right? The Shang rulers had now lost it and it had been given to the ZHOU. And the ZHOU sent relatives of the king out into the countryside to serve as, I guess you would call them vassal rulers. You could imagine them as dukes or things like that as well if you wanted. But they were supposed to be in charge of areas in the countryside. And so they were there to kind of boss the peasants around, but also to make sure that they paid tribute to the ZHOU emperor and to listen to him when he told them what to do, right? So this kind of arrangement was something that we called ZHOU kinship feudalism, okay? And so we said feudalism was kind of a political and economic system where we have kind of a decentralized authority. If you can imagine lots of nobles or lots of kind of mini kings living in the countryside in castles, in charge of the land around them, but also owing service to a larger king who rules over the whole area. And so this is how the ZHOU kings were ruling. There was one major king, kind of a ZHOU emperor, and then members of his family would be in charge of different areas of the countryside. They would basically be able to rule as they saw fit, but they were still responsible to the main ZHOU king or the ZHOU emperor. And so for some time, this system worked quite well, but eventually it would fail, right? We said that as time went on, those kinship relations would be lost, right? So if I was the ZHOU emperor and I sent my nephew out to rule a kingdom far away from my capital city, he would kind of do what I told him because we have a relationship, right? I'm his uncle and he's my nephew. But after I die and my son replaces me, and his son dies and his son replaces him, and maybe a few more generations go on, eventually my great-great-grandson and his great-great-grandson don't really have any relationship anymore. They don't really have any connection. And so, whereas my nephew would do what I told him because of our relationship, after a few generations, there's no real relationship anymore. And so what starts to happen is these lords start to identify with their own territory, and they stop listening to the emperor. They stop listening to the main ZHOU king. But unfortunately for the main ZHOU king or the ZHOU emperor, they weren't really strong enough to make these feudal lords do what they wanted. Okay, and so eventually this leads to increasing warfare, as nobody wants to listen to the ZHOU king. The ZHOU king is not able to listen to anyone else, and these lords see opportunities to take over the kingdom next door to them. And so we have a long period of battles, after which we only have about 15 states. And then we have this warring states period where these states are engaged with each other pretty much in continuous battle for about 250 years, believe it or not, until finally one king is able to unite all of these 15 states under their own rule. And that's the beginning of the Qin dynasty in 221 BCE. And so we kind of saw this period of political centralization and political stability in the Zhou dynasty, in the Shang, and in the Zhou. But as the Zhou dynasty continues, things kind of fall apart, right? The structure that sort of keeps everybody united under one ruler is based on heredity, and it's based on family relationships. But as those family relationships get more distant and separated over time, these little states start to fight with each other, and eventually we get hundreds of years of political decentralization, hundreds of years of these groups fighting with each other, until finally we have a Qin emperor who is able to, again, unite everybody under his rule. And then again, we have a period of political centralization. And so you'll see this quite a bit. We've already seen it with Egypt, with their old, middle, and new kingdom. We've seen it in Indian history, and we see it here again in China, where historians like to divide historical periods in terms of times when we have stability and political and economic centralization, and then there are periods usually in between where things are chaotic and really no one person is in charge. Okay, and so we see that happening again here in Chinese history as well. Okay, let's talk about this guy, because Confucius here is an important person for Chinese culture, for Chinese history, and he is around during he is around immediately following this period. And so he's a very interesting fellow. He has very interesting ideas. He can be compared to the Buddha in that he is a philosopher and a thinker. And he is someone who thinks a little bit differently from most people. And so based on his thinking and based on his teaching, he transmits those ideas, and they become woven into the greater culture. Okay, so he's an important guy that we should spend some time looking at. Now, in order to do that, I have a little video for you to watch, and we'll just watch part of it today. As usual, I have some questions for you to answer, because we can't just watch a video and enjoy it. We have to answer questions. So I do have some questions for you to answer as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post that stuff in Microsoft Teams right now, in fact. I've got a few questions for you. I've got a YouTube link in there for you. And I want you to watch the first 27 minutes of the video. And so, sorry, let me just give me a second to just post this here. So I'm going to ask you to watch the first 27 minutes of the video. And so we're at about 10:30 now. That'll take us to 11 to watch the video. We'll do a 10-minute break after that, and then we'll come back here. Let's come back here at 11:15, okay? So watch the video, take a 10-minute break, answer the questions and type them out, people. Type them out. And then when we come back here at 11:15, we will review some of the things that we've learned, okay? So the link and the time, so to 27 minutes, and the questions are now in Microsoft Teams. I'll turn you loose. I will let you, again, watch the video, answer the questions by typing them, take a break at the end of the video, and then come back here at 11:15 and we will discuss what we've seen, okay? So go ahead and do that, and I'll see you in just a bit, okay? Enjoy.
Since the dawn of civilization, the forces of nature and the whims of God
Okay, people, and we're back. So, I hope you, hi. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed the first part of the video there. The narrator makes a really interesting point about Confucius and about this point in history. Is that at this point in history, around maybe 4,000, around 400 BCE or so, we have a number of people who will become very influential thinkers in terms of world history and sort of world intellectual and religious tradition. And so last week or the week before, we talked about the Buddha, right? And the Buddha lived around 400 BCE, give or take. And here we have Confucius kind of living around the same time. And the narrator of the documentary points out that we also have Socrates, who's a famous Greek philosopher, again, also living right around the same time in history. So it's really interesting that these three guys who are in very different parts of the world and come from very different cultures are all having these very interesting and revolutionary thoughts kind of at the same time. But again, they have no connection between them, right? So let's dive in here and see what we can learn about our friend Confucius, okay? So the first question I asked you was this one here. So how are the rituals that a young Confucius practices, how are they important to the Chinese worldview? What do we learn about the importance of these rituals based on the importance of these rituals for Chinese worldview, ancient Chinese worldview? What do we learn? Okay, so Aliana says here, it's the first humanistic and universalist ethical philosophical system. Well, that will come later. So what Confucius will eventually develop can definitely be described that way. But also, it was a way to cultivate goodness. The whole person would be transformed down from the, yeah, it's very true. And so that's where Confucius will arrive at the end. That's what he'll come to. But at the beginning, Cindy says here, believes education can be transformed by individual and society. Yep, that's very true. That's very true. Karen says, it shows that one is supposed to take care of the living before the dead. Yeah, he does say that, right? He says that if you don't know how to take care of the living, how will you know how to take care of the dead, right? That's very true. But what was the purpose of those rituals right at the beginning of the documentary? Confucius says, or Cindy says that his vision was mostly on the power on the family. Yep, that's true. That's true. It's true. But what were those rituals for at the beginning? What did they say, Casey? So Casey says it's important because the Chinese worldview believes in order and in harmony. Yeah, and so those rituals kind of describe the idea that that the rituals that express order and harmony that express that order and harmony, and they allow life on Earth to continue. That's true. What else? Anything else? Anything else that we learned from those early rituals that young Confucius is practicing? So we learn that there's a desire for order and harmony in the universe, right? a desire for balance, if you will. Um, and maybe the other thing I'll throw in there too is this: the idea that um, the rituals that young Confucius practices and that other people practice in the temples, they're not worship of any kind of god. Okay, so the rituals aren't in praise of a god, but they help to maintain the balance in the universe, right? They help to maintain unity and harmony. So then I asked you this. I said, how does that relate to the two great cosmic forces? So what are these two cosmic forces, and what's their relationship? These two great cosmic forces. Okay, so I'm gonna maybe I'll pick this up as a continuation of your last point, Casey. So it's important because the Chinese worldview believes in order and harmony, and that order and harmony is essential if life on Earth was to continue. So those rituals, the rituals that are being practiced, are important to maintain order and harmony on Earth. But what are those two great cosmic forces that are mentioned? Those two great cosmic forces. Do you remember? Those two forces were kind of imagined as two kind of mythical creatures. Yeah, so the Earth, there's an Earth in the cosmos, right? So there's these two natural forces that are kind of locked in struggle. And what is the cosmos or the sky? What is that? What creature is that imagined as, or symbolized by? There's an ancient. That's okay. That's okay, Karen. What kind of mythical creature is symbolizes the sky or the cosmos? I'll give you a hint. They have them in Game of Thrones. Yeah, Casey. So there's dragons that represent the cosmos, right? And then there's a phoenix that represents the earth, right? And so these early, these two forces are kind of locked in eternal struggle, right? So there's a heavenly force, the dragon, and there's an earthly force, the phoenix, and they're locked in perpetual struggle, right? And so it's the job of humans to maintain the balance of the universe, right? And so these rituals don't worship any sort of god. These rituals maintain a universal balance between these two great forces, okay? This should be an easy one. We learn about this when the narrator, she crawls down into that giant pit. She crawls down the ladder. She climbs all the way down to tell us something that we kind of already know. But what benefit emerges from the technological changes in this period and in earlier periods too? What what kind of benefits do we get from that? And so KC says, yeah, the technological increases of a time lead to increases in agriculture. That produces more food, right? Suddenly people don't, not everyone has to be a farmer, and people have time to think. Yeah, that's good, KC, and that's good, Karen. Yeah, people have time to think because they don't have to constantly farm and worry about their food. And so fortunate people like Confucius can sit around all day and think about things, right? And we should know that, right? Because we talked about that early on when we talked about the development of civilizations, and that's pretty much the case in every civilization we've talked about. The Mesopotamian ones, the Egyptian one, the Indus River Valley civilization, and of course here is that if not everyone has to farm, it frees people up to do other things. And some people raise animals, some people build things like clay pots and carts and plows, some people make clothing and jewelry and sort of fancy things, and some people can sit around and think about things, right? And teach things. Yeah, so that's very good. So unfortunately for the narrator, she had to climb all the way down a ladder to tell us that, but I guess that's why they pay her big money to do the show, right? So Confucius is kind of on the road. He goes to Luoyang, which is a city that we heard about, right? That was where the Zhou kings moved, made a second capital on the Yellow River. So we learned about that at the beginning of the Zhou period. Confucius actually goes there, and on the way he, apparently the way that the narrator tells it, he bumps into some Taoists. And what do the Taoists believe? So Cindy says that there is a way. So the universe is represented by the way. There is a force behind all things. And again, if this sounds kind of Star Wars-y, I suspect that George Lucas probably borrowed from the Taoists when he wrote Star Wars. So there's a force behind all things called the way. KC says they believe in the way, which means that everything in the world comes from it and is the origin of the universe. Yes. So regarding this way, this is an extra question, but I'm going to ask it. What can man, and I mean people, not men, but what can people do about the way? What's humans' relationship with the way? So the Taoists believe there's this way, there's this force going back to the origin of the universe, and it's the force that kind of controls all things. And what can people do about this way? What can people do about this way? Excuse me. People do about this way? Let's see. So if I remember, the Taoists basically say that humans can't really do anything about the way, right? The way is the it's the force behind the universe, and humans simply have to live with it. They can't affect it. They can't control it. They can study more about it, I guess. But they can't do anything about this way, right? The way it is the way it is, and humans just have to kind of abide by it and live with it. And so the Taoists believe that if you align yourself more with nature, with the natural way, that you'll be more in alignment with how the universe works. And the Taoists think that society is kind of this artificial thing that humans create, and it takes us away from the way. It takes us, puts us in conflict with it, and then so that's kind of how bad things happen. That's how we become unhappy. Negative things happen when we are not aligned with the way the universe works, right? And so Confucius hears that, and what's Confucius's response to the Taoist teaching? How does he feel about it? What does he think about it? How does Confucius feel about these Taoist teachings that he encounters? So Cindy says, for him, the way wasn't unintentable. Do you mean, Cindy, do you mean untenable? Do you mean that? Untenable means that, like, you can't, it won't work. It doesn't work for someone. If something is untenable, it's not workable. It's not a possible option for them. KC says he's kind of frustrated, and he thinks that the way is not a tangible cosmic force. Yeah, he feels it's not a tangible cosmic force. Yeah, he's definitely frustrated. And I think maybe, Cindy, I'm going to go with this and say that, yeah, he says it's untenable, right? He feels that it's not going to work, because what is the point of doing anything, okay? So his idea, he says, he's a man, right? He's a human being, and human beings can choose to do things and not choose to do others. And so if the universe just is the way it is, and humans can do nothing about it, then why do anything, right? Why try to do one thing or the other when you have no control over how things are, right? So you're right. Confucius is a little frustrated. How do you create an ideal society if there's this way and you can't do anything about it, right? So Confucius is Confucius is not really happy with what he hears from the Taoists, and he continues searching, right? He continues looking for a way to create an ideal society. And so he goes to Luoyang, like we said. He goes to that city that was a capital for the ZHOU dynasty, and he is influenced when he gets there by the ZHOU in some way. And so how is he influenced? How is he influenced? How is he influenced? Okay, so Confucius believes early ZHOU society was an ideal manifestation of his concert. Yeah, I think you're right, Cindy. He felt that early ZHOU society. So when the ZHOU rulers originally overthrew the Shang dynasty, they united all of those areas under the ZHOU emperor. The Zhou emperor sent out all of those relatives of his to rule over neighboring lands. Confucius was looking back at that history. He was reading that history, and he felt that this was kind of an ideal manifestation of society, right? An ideal, a golden age, if you will. Karen says, they believe simple life makes one behave better in society. Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that very shortly. Yeah, so he's looking back. He's looking back at the history of the Zhou rulers, and in that history, he sees an ideal society. He sees kind of, the good old days, if you will. Whether they were that good is always a question. Sometimes people remember things to be better than they are, but he did see that early period of the Zhou dynasty as a golden age, and so he started digging into history and ritual from that period to try to bring it forward into the period he was in, and he thought that was a way to to create a better society. And so finally here, what did Confucius discover within these ancient rites? What did he discover within these ancient rites? So Confucius looks back through the history of the Zhou dynasty. He looks at these sort of rituals that people are performing in the past, and what kind of things does he start to think about them? This is a bit of a tricky question, but that's okay. Bit of a tricky question, but what does he think? So one of the things they talk about is ancestor worship, right? This is an important part of Chinese culture, the importance of ancestors, and the ancients believe that the ancestors are still around us, right? They're still here, and they need to be addressed and spoken to. They need to be cared for. They need to be fed. They need to be given drink, right? This is an important part of kind of respecting and honoring the ancestors. And so ancestor worship is part of it. And I think this is where we get to that statement where Karen, where you said they show us one is supposed to take care of the living before the dead, right? So he's looking at these rituals of ancestor worship and says, hey, it's great to take care of the ancestors, but you need to take care of living people first, right? You need to know how to take care of living people first. What else does he learn? This is right before the end of the video, and I think it's when the narrator is sitting on a bench with that guy I think he's from Beijing University, I forget his name. She's sitting there and she's talking to him, and he is telling us about what Confucius starts to think about with these ancient rituals. And I think this is the important point, I think. This is the important point. I'll just give you a minute, and then I will talk about it, okay? Okay, so, the thing that I think, one of the main things that I think Confucius is thinking about, and I think that it's an important part of what they're saying in the documentary here, is this, okay? So Confucius comes to the idea, or comes to the decision. Okay, Karen, I'm gonna let you in there first. Um, yeah, rituals are supposed to be done with good intentions and goodwill, right? So Confucius says it's not good enough just to go through the motions, right? It's not just good enough to sort of, do the ritual and say your prayers, and just because you're supposed to. You have to feel it, right? You have to do it with intention. You have to do it sincerely, right? Doing the ritual with no feeling, there's no point, right? So he says, yeah, the rituals are supposed to be done with good intentions. And when you do it with good intentions, it brings out positive emotions. And so if you do the rituals with sincerity, the thing you do on the outside will go inside. Okay? So having the right thoughts, having the right emotions when you do the ritual can actually transform who you are. Okay? And so there's an idea that thought and physical action can actually change who you are on the inside, right? And when you think about it, that's kind of a different idea from the Buddha, right? From the Buddha, everything was coming from the inside, right? He sat down, he didn't really do anything, he just sat and meditated, and came to the idea that if you could free yourself from desire, that you would escape this cycle of death and rebirth, and you would become enlightened, right? So there was kind of the Buddha has kind of an inside out sort of way of thinking about this. But for Confucius, it's a little more of an outside in, right? If you do the correct rituals, if you perform these actions with feeling and with sincerity and with good intentions, that will actually change who you are on the inside. It will make you into a better person, which again is a very interesting idea, different from what Buddha was saying, but very interesting nonetheless. Okay. So I think that's all I have for you today. We've only got about 5 minutes left. And so come back tomorrow. We'll pick up a little more on Confucius and maybe a little more on Taoism. I know we've learned about it a little bit already. But that's what we'll do. And then tomorrow I guess will be Friday already. So for those of you who are participating in the live chat, thank you very much. You did a really good job. I know that sometimes with the videos, it is tough to keep track and tough to get the answers, especially if they don't have closed captioning, which this one doesn't have. But you did a good job. I think we learned what we needed to learn. And so come back tomorrow and we'll sort of keep uncovering Confucius's ideas, a little bit of Taoism, and then we'll kind of move forward in Chinese history as well. So with that, I think I will. Does anyone have any questions, or are you good? Let me know in the comments. Good? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Don't give me a middle finger. That's not cool. What do you think? Okay, Aliana's good. Karen's good. Cindy's good. Ying is good. Min is good. Albert is good. Okay, Jimmy's good. Casey has 3 thumbs up. You only have 2 thumbs, Casey. Come on. Come on. Sam's good. Anyone else in here, or is that it? Okay. So, yeah, thank you all for being here. You did a good job. That's it for today. I'll see you tomorrow, which will be Friday, which is awesome. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Hope you don't have to work too hard for the rest of the day, but that's it. I'll see you later. Okay. So, bye, people.